Welcome to Wrestling with Heart, a podcast looking at pro wrestlers giving back to their community. Join me, Stanley Carr, as I interview wrestling's hottest names who use their platforms as entertainers to raise awareness and do community service. Hello and welcome to another edition of Wrestling with Heart. This is the show where we talk with professional wrestlers and professional wrestling personalities about their lives in and outside of the ring, as well as doing acts of charity, community service, volunteering, and spreading positivity. We're all about the positivity here on the show. And with me today, I've got a very special guest. He is the host of the Pro Wrestling Zone podcast, as well as been commentating for several wrestling promotions throughout the East Coast, and also hosts the Pro Wrestling Zone television show, which you can see in Brooklyn, New York on Channel 48, as well as all affiliates across the United States. Pleased to welcome the one and only Rick Del Santo. Rick, welcome to Wrestling with Heart.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. Appreciate you having me. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Why don't we delve into your upbringing and childhood? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a semi-small town. It's kind of grown over the last few decades, but of Woodbridge, Connecticut, right outside New Haven, Connecticut. So, I grew up on old farmland, and there was not a whole lot to do. I had to go in across the town lines into the city of New Haven if I actually wanted to do anything. You know what I mean? And I discovered professional wrestling around 1984, and it was kind of all over after that. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, because around that time, the territories were still around, but that's when WWE became national. You saw that national expansion. You had the NWA as well, which later became WCW. But that was when you started seeing that rise to national superstardom with guys like Hogan and Savage and Andre, Roddy Piper. I mean, the list goes on as far as that goes, but that was a hot time in the business.
It was. The first thing I discovered was, man, you just mentioned, was Roddy Piper. And I remember walking into we had a duplex where I lived. It was I lived on the first floor, me and my family, and then my mom's cousin and lived on the second floor. So I was up there one day watching as my cousin was watching WWF wrestling, and I never had seen it before. And Roddy Piper was the man on the screen, and I just became so immersed in that at that moment. And Piper became one of my all-time favorites for decades, obviously.
What was it about Roddy Piper that really got you hooked?
I think it was the fact that people love to hate him. Like, he was annoying. The arrogance that was about him, he just he was awesome, man. He was just awesome. There was just something about that guy, and he didn't take no crap either.
Really was one of those old school villains that you just could not stand, but he really proved himself with his showmanship
Absolutely.
and his acting abilities, which later translated into the motion pictures. So it's incredible how his legacy still lives on, and his kids, I believe, are still wrestling now or wrestling now.
Oh, yeah, I believe so. Yep.
Yeah. So 1984, getting into wrestling. Besides Roddy Piper, who else were you impressed with?
I'm not gonna lie, I was a Hulkamaniac, and for my first few years, you know what I mean. He was the hero. Everybody loved him, and he would pack the arenas. As time went on, I started to discover I started to like wrestlers for their actual ability as opposed to their showmanship. So I started to get into guys like Rick Rude, who was a fantastic grappler, the Dynamite Kid, guys like that would just go out there and put out bangers. The Fabulous Rougeau brothers were also like a favorite of mine. The Hart Foundation, stuff like that. Tito. Yeah.
Definitely a lot of just talent that really made their way and just became superstars. Pardon the pun there, but it was amazing to see how far they could go in the ring and out of the ring. So those are some pretty good names right there.
Yeah, they were larger than life characters, you know what I mean? It was an amazing thing. They went from being these guys that were wrestling regionally and then just becoming everybody just started to come onto one gigantic stage, and it was always the biggest show. And WWF had this thing for selling their events and putting it making it sound like it was the biggest event going on at that very moment.
Yeah, they definitely made you want to buy the pay-per-view or watch the TV show the next week. Really got you interested. Really got
Absolutely.
you wanting to tune in. So you get in, you become a fan. You're like watching all these guys, interested in all these guys. How did you decide? What made you decide this is what I want to get into?
That came actually way later in life. That's the funny part, because it was always something that was in the back of my head. You know what I mean? I was kind of involved a little bit musically with music and stuff like that, but nothing ever came of it. I had a radio show for a short time on college radio, which I enjoyed doing. But however, my partner that had the connection with the radio station eventually moved off because he to California, because he was involved heavily with the music industry and then got a job out in California. So then the show kind of died. I think it was 2019 actually that I started to look into getting back into radio as like just doing a music show, and I was going to try like public outlets, community radio, something like that. And then it's like I'll just maybe I'll just decide to do a podcast instead. And then one day, and I had actually there's probably a period for about 2 years that I stopped watching wrestling, believe it or not, around that time period, probably like 2017 ish. But it was a chance running into on my way to work one morning. I used to stop at this gas station, grab a cup of coffee, etc., and breakfast along the way. I ran into Paul Roma from Power and Glory, Young Stallions, WWF, WCW superstar. And he and I had some mutual friends, and I had spoken with him. He invited me. He runs a school out here. Him and Mario Mancini run a wrestling school out here, and they have a promotion that coincides with that promotion or with the school. And I ran into him. He invited me down, and I walked into that building for their next show. And I ran into a good buddy of mine, the Guardian of Chaos, Big Daddy, who I had not seen in probably 20 years, who was a manager up in this northeastern part of the United States. And he's done some great things. And but we started talking, and then eventually I started just going to shows constantly. It was the first time I had been to so many shows in such a long time. You know what I mean? I was
Really?
going to shows basically on a weekly basis, a bi-weekly basis, something like that. And then I just eventually just little by little started getting involved. And then a couple of my friends, I did a couple commentary gigs for that company, probably a couple matches here and there, and they went pretty well. But then a couple of my friends were restarting a company that they had run in New York called Empire Pro Wrestling, Nick and Hakim the House of Pain, and they had contacted me and said, "Hey, we're looking for somebody to do commentary. Would you be interested?" I said, "Absolutely." And then I had been doing the podcast for a few years. I had interviewed a lot of guys out of New England, some legends, and eventually that's what just led into me from podcasting to being involved in the professional wrestling industry. And it's just I've had an amazing probably 5 or so years doing this, just meeting so many great people. And then we had this amazing event last night, which I guess we'll get into a little bit later, that I'd love to put over to you guys. So that's what kind of led to me to actually get into the wrestling industry.
Wow, it's amazing with your radio background. You were doing that for a long time, and all goes hand to hand. I mean, it's still a part. What a lot of people don't know is like the radio podcasting world, and you in making that transition. It's all part of that broadcasting
Yes, 100%.
circles.
Yeah.
So
And when I was doing radio, like podcasting was literally in its infancy. There was like now it seems like everybody and their mother has a podcast. So, I mean, not that that's a bad thing, because there's one thing. It's like anytime I run into somebody, it's like, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting a podcast." It's like, "Hey, I'll help you get off the ground." Or I always encourage people that if they say they want to do it or become a content creator, I always try to encourage them and try to give them a hand and help them, because it's like I know what it was like when I decided that I was just going to do a podcast, and then then it was going to be a music one. Then I said, forget it. I was just going to do something wrestling related, because I said full blown got into wrestling. And it's just it took me a long time to sell myself to a lot of these guys. You know what I mean? But it was because of like people such as Nick and Hakim and the Guardian of Chaos and Mario Mancini that I was able to prove myself, because those guys gave me chances, and those guys would actually put me over, especially Mario. If somebody doesn't know who I am, they usually ask him. I'm not sure. You're familiar with Mario Mancini?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely heard of him.
Yep. He was a preliminary wrestler for WWF, and I think it was 84 to 92, I believe.
Hmm.
And he a tremendous human being. But there's a couple guys that had no idea who I was, but they saw that I was friends with Mario. They asked him, he'd always say, "Hey man, this guy's good." I don't take cheap shots at anybody's careers or any of that kind of stuff. So I just want to part of my goal is to just get an interesting story out there and share the memories, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we try to do on our show, is to create a positive space for not only wrestling fans, but to show the good side of the business, and how
Right.
these guys and gals uh help one another, help people, and make a difference in people's lives. And that's something I definitely want to put out there, and use this platform in order to do that. So it's amazing how you're able to break in to that business. It's part of that broadcasting circle, and it seems like this has worked out pretty well. You get the gig, you're announcing for different promotions. Uh, who are like some of your influences as far as announcing goes?
So it's funny because I actually go back and I study tape a lot now, because I'm always wanting to improve myself. As of late, I've been going back and watching a lot of like old Mid Atlantic, NWA Mid Atlantic, and watching Bob Caudle, because it's like the last year he's become like one of my heroes in a way, because the guy's style. He called it like a sport, and that's exactly how I do it. I call it as if it's a legitimate sport. Call it move for move. Just try to put over both gentlemen uh, in the ring, and not try to horseplay with any BS. You know what I mean? Like the industry has become such a show that a lot of times they don't focus on what's going on in the ring over commentary. So so that's what I continue to try to do. Another one of my heroes is Bill Mercer, who used to announce for World Class Championship Wrestling. I've been watching a lot of World Class, and he's one of those guys that as of late in the last few years, like I've always enjoyed his work, but it's like the last few years, he's just and watching a lot of World Class. I watch a lot of World Class growing up, because it was on every day after school on ESPN when I got home. And he's really just, for some reason, that guy's style. He was just very he was also a radio guy. He was a radio broadcaster, and he was just always very interesting the way that he would announce and put over the matches.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, having that radio guy, that radio background, transitioning into wrestling definitely goes hand in hand. So it's amazing to see how many guys that have been in that industry have made that transition. Uh,
Absolutely.
so it's really fascinating. Me myself, I'm in the radio industry myself, so it's very cool to see more people see that you're not alone, for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's awesome. You got those influences when you're commentating. I mean, I would have to say like that energy level is important when you're out there.
Yes. Because say if these two guys in the ring or the tag team, whatever, if they're putting on a stinker, it's up to you to put that match over and try to get the audience that's watching at home uh invested in that matchup. So it's not always easy, but you got to make sure you got to sound enthusiastic. You know what I mean? You have to make sure that is something amazing going on in that ring.
Yeah. And you have to sell it so that you care about what's going on, so that
Absolutely.
you'll want to tune in to the next week. So that's
If you
very
don't sound
crucial.
if you sound like you don't care about what's going on, you can't expect the audience that's watching at home to care at all.
No, yeah, I mean you have to be invested somehow, and that's what the announcer's
100%.
job is supposed to do, is to be invested.
Exactly.
Look at all the WrestleMania main events in years past. I mean, the commentators will definitely demonstrate that these people, whether they're a man or a woman that's in the ring, male or female main events, that's what's going to sell tickets if you promote it and
Absolutely.
you know,
That's
push
that's
it.
the thing that's a thing that's really big right now, and it's big in here in Connecticut. Is that there's a lot of promotions here. We have like 8 promotions here in Connecticut. And there's a lot of times there's like 3 or 4 running per event per weekend or per on the same night, maybe a Friday or Saturday night. And sometimes people will come up to me like, I had no idea that this show was happening. It's because the promotion is such a big deal. You can't just do the online work these days. It's not. A lot of people think that you're promoting on social media, it's going to help out so much. I've worked shows where there's been less than 30 people. I've worked shows where there's
Really?
been less than 20. I've worked shows where there's been less than 20 people in attendance. So you gotta the promotion is a big thing. It's like the social the footwork is not a dead medium where you go to the local businesses and advertise, put your poster up in a deli, put your poster up in in a local supermarket if they'll allow you. It's because the online thing, it's a young kid's game, so to speak. And I'm a little bit older, so we promote like hell. Pardon my language. I don't know if I'm allowed to use that word on this program, but we promote like hell to get people to these shows, and there's sometimes it just does not deliver. We put on social media, but with the footwork, going out there and going into town to local businesses and such, and that will definitely draw people. I just worked this tremendous show last night where we promoted this for months. My podcast was a part of it. 2 different companies that I do commentary for were a part of it, and it picked up news, news outlets started covering it and such. So, and then all
Yeah.
of a sudden we had over 400 people in this room for a local indie promoter, or 4 local indie promotions coming together. And it ended up being an amazing, amazing evening, an amazing show.
Yeah, I mean, now with social media, that's a very important component to promotion for events, because that's how
Yeah.
you reach young people. Like you said, if you reach the 20-year-old or 30-year-old, uh that's how you get out there now. So it's
Yeah.
important to reach those younger folks, so because they're the ones that are the driving force behind what you guys are doing.
Right. Yeah. And if some older people, if it's not going to come up in their algorithm because they're, you know, maybe they don't follow a lot of wrestling. Maybe they're in the comic books or something to that
Mm-hmm.
effect. It's not always going to come up, and some people are just not always going to hear about your show. So it is important to get out there physically and promote stuff as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about the big event you guys recently had. That had to have been spectacular.
Well, this was, I got to tell you, we were all nervous going in. You know, this was a juvenile diabetes benefit. A friend of mine, Cesar Vasquez, and his family started this nonprofit organization called United by One, which coincides with the JDRF, juvenile diabetes awareness and stuff. So um they had this idea, this big idea. They're going to bring in every company in Connecticut, which is where we're from, and there was one from New York that was actually involved. They're bringing every company in Connecticut together. Some companies declined to be involved for reasons that I cannot disclose here, but I'm going to be honest with you. Everybody put in their legwork, everybody put in the promotion. We had guys from each company. Some of the guys cross over from company to company, but we've had guys from each company come in together, and it ended up being, we had over 400 people in this room. A lot of money was raised to donate to the cause. We had Fuego del Sol there. We had Sunny Kiss there. Every match delivered, I got to tell you, and it was just a huge, wild success. I know Caesar, the organizer of the event, and Harry Davila, who runs Blood, Sweat, and Tears Wrestling here. Those two basically were doing everything together and in promoting this whole thing. I know they were nervous AF for weeks to come. Day of the show, you could definitely tell. But once those doors opened in and that room was filled up with over 400 people, we knew that this thing was a gigantic success, and there was just an amazing night of professional wrestling for a very good cause.
And you guys raised a lot of money too.
Absolutely, absolutely did. So I don't know the exact amount, but I know they definitely did. We had raffles. We had the children involved in a lot of stuff. You know, I brought my kids with me. They sat there. We had gimmick tables set up. I did commentary for a few of the matches. Each company that was involved had their own commentators, and I worked for two of the companies, so I got a couple matches on it. It was quite enjoyable. I had a
Yeah.
blast, and I think everybody in that room had a blast.
That's so amazing that you got to do that.
Yeah.
What is it about giving back to your community that gives you the most joy?
I mean, you know, you got to make these people happy, right? They'll make you happy. I like seeing people happy. I don't like seeing misery, you know. And one of the thing about professional wrestling is it brings people together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other thing. It just brings a bunch of strangers into a room, independent wrestling, and people will just, you know, I've made so many friends through the professional wrestling world. It's unbelievable. So all these people just become a big part of your life. The wrestling community is just an amazing place, I think.
And I like how you described it. It is like a family. It's a
Yeah,
close knit
absolutely.
together group of people, guys and gals that care about each other, want to support each other. So kudos to you for being a part of that, and being welcomed into the family. That's very important as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why don't we talk about your podcast and television show that you're now involved with? Because I think this is really cool.
Well, I have actually two different TV shows that I do host. Both of them for this channel right here. You see the sign behind me, WON Sports. And then I'm also a host of a professional wrestling show as well. So everything is shown through this WON Sports out of Brooklyn, New York. Jonathan Rios is the owner. Uh, it's a they're based in Brooklyn. They have they're streaming on through Roku, and they also stream their channel live through their website, and they have affiliates across the United States. It's an amazing outlet. Saturdays is filled with professional wrestling. You can see my beautiful face for about 5 hours over the
Wow.
weekend. Yeah, over the weekend. So I host a 2 hour program, which is PWZ on WON Sports, where it's usually me and Harry DeVilla. We discuss what's going on in the world of professional wrestling. Normally, stuff throughout the northeastern part of the United States, which brings Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut, and sometimes Rhode Island and elsewhere. But that doesn't mean that we don't discuss national and international wrestling as well, like the big time. We usually have a guest. It's usually a guy from that maybe works for one of our companies here out of Connecticut or New York, and sometimes there's guys that are a little bit more well known, but they're usually guys that are pretty well known in our area. So that that just I don't know exactly how that became. I was doing the podcast, which was the PWZ Pro Wrestling Zone, and eventually I guess that it just somebody said that they were looking for stuff for a television station, and I contacted the guy and said, "Okay, yeah, sure, you can start in April." Said, "Oh, that's it." He goes, "Can you do 2 hours?" I said, "I could try." I don't know. I'm normally doing like 45 minutes to an hour, but it's been hard coming up with 2 hours worth of content, but I've been able to pull it off for about since April. So
Wow.
so yeah, so that's a new outlet, and then I also host a show called WON Ringside, which is I bring a lot of different promotions that don't necessarily have a television program. Uh, each one was with permission and their grace, and then I get footage from all these different companies, and I present a 1 hour TV show, all different companies from all over the world. Small independent companies. I go through the matches. I choose 3, 4 matches per week and put up an hour program that I host. Similar to if you've ever watched Pro Wrestling This Week from the 1980s with
Mm-hmm.
uh, Joe Pedicino and Gordon Solie or Bill
Yeah.
Apter. Uh,
Yeah. I've seen
it
those
was
shows.
yeah, it's similar to that type of thing where it's just like I sit there, I'll tell news, I'll advertise upcoming shows and bring matches featuring all these different independent promotions. And then I host the Coliseum Pro Wrestling. I host their 1 hour weekly show called Prime Time, which 7 o'clock every Saturday night on WON. So
Yeah, it seems like you've been keeping busy, and
yeah.
see, the thing about pro wrestling is that today is that it's more accessible now than it used to be, with the advent of social media and the internet. And it's pretty amazing to see the number of outlets that you can get local content on, because it gives
Yeah.
them a platform to showcase their stuff. And that, just like with the territories, a lot of those guys from the territories went on to become big stars in the national scene. So some of the people from today could be big stars on WWE or AEW television.
I could see that happening with a lot of guys that come across my screen or come across the rings that I work with, you know what I mean? The companies that I work with, you know, there's a lot of really great talent out here in the Northeast. And some of these guys, you know, I see some of these guys on TV now watching like MLW or whatnot, you know, and even when AEW Dark was a thing, you know, like some of the guys from up here would go down and end up on the on that program there.
Yeah. Where do you see this show or these shows in the next 5 years? What's the goal?
I really want to get the products that I'm involved with bigger audiences. You know what I mean? Coliseum Pro Wrestling is my home. I want to see, we're in a very small building right now, and we attract possibly 100 or more fans each show. We run, and it's I want to get that to a bigger gymnasium, host possibly fundraiser events where we can get the attention. We got the TV. I just want to be able to get the attention, because we have a really good crew of people that are dedicated and putting in the work constantly, whether it be me, Nick, Steven Garcia, you know, and the talent that comes through there, I have to tell you, is amazing. They're all really good at doing what they're supposed to be doing. As far as promoting themselves and getting in the ring and putting on bangers. It's just that you need that one eye that's going to be like, hey man, you need to check this out. And that person tells their buddy, and that person tells that buddy. So my goal is to make any promotion that I'm working with, try to get them more attention. That's it. And try to, I would love to do this full time, but I know that's not, you know, at this age, it's not necessarily going to happen. So, but I'm enjoying doing what I'm doing. I've had the busiest month of my wrestling career. I've been booked every single weekend for the month of November. That's the first time that I've ever been booked for every single weekend.
Rick, this has been awesome to have you as a guest here on Wrestling with Heart. I want to thank you. It means a lot to me and to my listeners and viewers on YouTube. Where can people find you on social media?
You can look up on Facebook. It's just PWZ. You see my logo there. And you could also find on Instagram PWZ on WON. That is my most active page. I use Instagram the most. We're also on TikTok and everywhere else where I post clips of the shows and stuff like that. But Instagram is definitely where I'm the most active, and you can contact me there. You know, I'm pretty good at responding and to just about anybody.
All right. Well, thank you again, Rick, and you're more than welcome to come back.
Thank you, Stanley. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. This is Wrestling with Heart. I hope you found this podcast to be informative and entertaining. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and look out for the next edition.